Hi, everybody. Welcome. You are at Raising Money from Companies with an Equity Lens, and I'm so glad you're here. A few months ago, one of my clients said to me, when a company calls, I just accept whatever they say and say yes. I was shocked to hear that that's how they felt. And I also knew that there are so many of the CSR and corporate partnership people that I work with that would be so devastated to hear that that was what that person felt. That combined with my learning over the last number of years and more recently, number of months, I really wanted to talk more and learn even more about corporate partnerships from an equity lens and how I could do better in this space. And with that in mind, I spoke to Rickesh about it, and we have a discussion for you today where we're going to try to offer up some questions, some ideas, and some examples of how we can look at corporate partnership through an equity lens. Okay, so before I get started, I wanted to mention that this past week, a great report came out from Imagine Canada, an agency funded by RBC Foundation that really is relevant to this topic. And from the mind to the heart, advancing equity in corporate social investment. You should all read it. I will put a link in the chat so that you can go sign up for that. That report is really relevant to our conversation today. And one of the things that it did speak about in that report was that white women are very well represented in this space. So I did want to acknowledge, own the fact that I am a white cisgendered woman. And so that perspective is coming to this discussion. And it is reflected in the statistics of this report that I make up the majority of people in this space. So it's an interesting dynamic and perspective, I guess, as we start this conversation. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather Nelson. I'm the lead consultant and president at BridgeRaise. We are a corporate fundraising consultancy that work with nonprofits to raise more money from companies. And as I said, I'd like to welcome Rickesh Lakhani to the conversation. Hi, Rickesh. Wondered if you could introduce yourself to everybody joining us.
Thanks, Heather. It's really good to be here. I'm Rickesh Lakhani, 15 years plus of experience in the sort of social impact space in a few different roles. And now sort of the lead consultant at Radiance Advisory, where we're really trying to work with how do we kind of do this work better. And I think oftentimes we want to do better. We want to look at things with a lens of fairness or equity or justice, and we want to do better within our organizations. But we often need help with the how and understanding what's really going on. So I support social impact leaders and organizations to really understand better what's going on within organizations and to be able to live their values and how it plays out on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, well, it's such important work. So glad to have you working in this space, in this sector. I think I just know already so many organizations that are already getting value from you, and more important conversations to come, right? That this is, it's a place for conversation and curiosity. And I know that that's what you're bringing to this conversation and to the clients that you're going to work with.
Thanks, Heather.
Okay, now as we get into our topic today, we are going to talk about raising money from corporations with an equity lens. I wanted to start with what are like the basics, which are around power dynamics. We talked about this really being an area we wanted to focus in on. So what are some signs that power dynamics might be a part of the partnership?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I think it's important that we're talking about that specifically because there are other topics that come up in the space of corporate partnerships, such as other values pieces, and we know that relationships can be a source of issues, and so we really have to acknowledge and reflect on that. And the power dynamics can show up in a number of different ways, and they can often lead to negative outcomes and harm. But then they can also be a source of learning and common purpose as you work through some of those things together. So we really want to be I think we're mindful in this whole conversation. When we talk about power dynamics, we're not trying to vilify corporations or charities, nonprofits. We just want to be open to learning and hearing from others so that we can kind of find that common ground. And through building that clarity on values and boundaries, we can have those open and honest conversations with funders and corporate partners and really shift that conversation. So when you talk about power dynamics, there's a few different ways that, if you're sitting there and you're someone who raises, does done corporate partnerships and fundraising, you feel them when I mention them, that you might feel pressure for your organization to do certain things that you may not be comfortable with or don't feel are sort of fair as part of receiving the funding. So you might get unusual requests. You might feel there's a lack of transparency in the processes. Like, I don't really understand how you're making decisions about this funding and how we apply properly and how we ensure we're putting our best foot forward. You feel like there isn't, you're giving feedback in terms of the process or the relationship, and it's not being heard, or there's even no opportunities to give that feedback. And ultimately, you might feel like the partnership is not really serving you. As an interesting thing about that is, like you said before, though, you work with a lot of folks in this space, and I wonder if sometimes they're even aware of how we're feeling, if we feel like if we keep it to ourselves a bit.
Yeah, it's really, those indicators of there being a power differential are really important to kind of call out and recognize. I actually want to go back to this idea of like the vilification of the company, or even just we have not, they know more, we know less, or any of those kinds of things. Like, if we go into it with that mindset, it really kind of does set it up. And where, talking instead of like, that if the charity feels like an expert, then that might be a different position. And so, like, on one hand, there's those signals of why you might feel in a weaker position in the power differential. And I think it'd be interesting to go through them and talk about what would be like the alternative perspective. Like, we have value in this conversation. Maybe we both want to be here. Maybe as, and we've talked more, assuming that person on the other line actually does respect and want to hear from you. Like some of those kinds of things, and how can we kind of shift that a little bit?
Yeah, I love that, because I think they're coming to work with us for a reason. We do have subject matter expertise, and I think sharing that and saying this is why we're working together is critical. They have certain things that they know well, and then we're working together so we can bring our specific talents and ability and knowledge to the table in this work. And that's why they're here. So I think there's a lot of concern about, they say don't bite the hand that feeds you. So people feel like, you can't say anything, and like they're giving the money, so we have to do everything that they say. And I just think we have to take a role in shifting that as well. I do think that something that else is important in this is that a lot of times we feel like we don't speak out of fear, that what I mentioned, and that's understandable. I think we have to recognize then our role in advocating for better, because the truth is, if we don't say something and we don't do something about it, then we know that it definitely will not change. And there's obviously some system things that need to sort of be reevaluated. But as charities, if we just come to the table saying, hey, we know what we're talking about. And so we're trying to be here as equals, and let's share where we're coming from. And from an education, as you said, not vilification, from an education standpoint, we can actually advance and shift conversations. And then what I love is that they'll hopefully take that into other relationships that they have with other charities and nonprofits. So it's serving not just your own organization's relationship, but also their work overall. They're like, wow, like I often have found that people are like, when I have these conversations, like, wow, like why did no one ever tell me this before?
So true. I mean, first of all, let's get rid of that don't bite the hand that feeds you. I think we can be at the point where we can evolve past that, because I think you can educate and not say yes to anything and still receive the money. That is the reality of my experience. I know you have examples of that being the truth too. So, we don't need to be as aggressive as biting perhaps, but I mean, not saying yes to everything, and asking questions and trying to understand what they're looking for, as opposed to, sometimes they're coming with a suggestion about what they want because that's what they're familiar with. That's what they think might be a good idea. Maybe they came up with a few good ideas. And that does not mean that if you provide an alternative or you ask what they want and then, have a conversation, that you can't shift that. It's, it's sometimes just oh, that's what I thought it was going to be like, or
Mhm.
that's, that was just an idea we had. So,
Mhm.
that kind of idea that uh, they've got it all figured out and you don't. Again, like I think really undervalues the expertise that you have both in your organization, but also in how the relationship could look, how the partnership could look.
Mhm.
And the more we see the move towards like co-created partnerships or benefits that are worked out between the parties, like the better the outcomes of those, the more sustainable they are, the better everyone feels about them. So those can't exist without the person at the charity saying something, right? Like the saying, no, that isn't going to work, or what's your intention with
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
and that kind of thing. Then they're walking away without that added knowledge.
Mhm. It's actually, I see it as a missed opportunity. It's
Yeah.
like this is an opportunity where you have someone's captive attention, and they're listening to each other, and you have not contributed to the relationship, the way that I think is your duty. I think we also have to say that for charities and nonprofits, I mean, an important factor in this that makes it conducive to fundraisers or partnership builders to feel like they can have these conversations is, of course, also a management and org that supports these conversations if for by any chance they sort of don't go the way that you had planned. I think because it's that
Right.
fear element. So we have
Right.
to make sure that you say, hey, I'm going to do what I know is the right thing to do. It's the right thing for our organization, for the communities we serve. And it's also out of respect to the folks we're coming to the table with as partners. I'm going to bring this forward. And sometimes it may, or I mean, I've always found it usually goes really much better than you thought it would.
Yeah.
But in case it does not, that's possible. But we need to know going in that our management and our organization has our back as well. So I think that's another critical
Yeah.
piece, is that what is the circumstances within an org that will allow you to feel comfortable bringing these things forward. And as you start to do it, and you start to have them, you start to realize, oh wow, it's getting easier for me, and also they're going better than I'd even thought they would.
Yeah. It's important to signal, because I know that most recently you were an executive role at your organization, so you could make those decisions more widely. But maybe somebody that is like in a more junior role at the organization may be concerned that their ED or CEO would be like, no, we need that money. One of the things that we talk about at Bridge Raise often is like, that's why we recommend having corporate partnership guidelines. And the first section is about your values. Like, what are the values that you are putting around corporate partnership? Because if you decide those and provide some guardrails around, this is what we do and this is what we don't do, then you give people throughout the organization, throughout your charity, sort of the agency to have those conversations and know that they're going to be backed up by, guidelines that are in place that your organization has agreed upon. And I think it's super, super important to do that. We also know that there's statistical evidence that the best corporate partnerships honestly are between two organizations that are values aligned. So we're counting on both organizations to know what their values are going into it. And that idea of values alignment, I think, can really put a lot of power into the hands of the charitable organization if they can define them and talk to them with the partner. Then if it doesn't fit, it can be clear on both sides, like, yeah, this isn't going to work for either of us. Let's walk away, honestly, before we both put a ton of energy into something that ends up being transactional or just a really negative experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. We want it to work for everybody, and I think there's times where it will work, there's times where it won't. But I think if we're clear on what those are up front, I think that's the key piece. We might walk in either not being clear on what the values are for either side or both sides, or we feel like even though we know our values, we don't feel like we can actually say something about it. You know what I mean? So we feel
Yeah.
like we can't speak to those values. And I think that's also another place where things might fall through. It's like, no, here's what we're about, and with that conviction, I also think comes respect for the relationship when both sides are coming in saying, here's who we are, and here's where the overlap is. I love Venn diagrams, so it's like, here's our values, yours, and let's find where they overlap. So
I love a good Venn diagram too, especially when there's a good amount of overlap. We've started to leak into this question, but I want to ask it really intentionally. What are some criteria for how you would define a good partnership through the lens of equity and power dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few kind of thoughts that come to mind around that that are feeling like you're kind of leveling the playing field a little bit. I think often we may come into these discussions feeling like, no, we're at a we're not at sort of that equal partner level, but I think definitely mutually beneficial. And I think we have to be
Mhm.
clear on what we're looking for out of the partnership. And sometimes it's funding, often it's funding, but there's other components as well, and also what we'll be offering in return. So it has to be mutually beneficial. As you already said, it's values aligned. So getting clear on what your values are and understanding the values of the potential partner or current partner are important. And also that you kind of feel like this is a little hard to measure, but like, are we being treated as equal partners? Do we feel like in conversations that there's respect and for mutual respect and for what we're bringing to the table as well? Because the reality is we have a lot of great things to offer. Are there reasonable expectations of each other? Is it like, well, we're going to give you, $5,000, but you got to fill out this gigantic form and report on it to this 20-page report every quarter, or things like that, or we want 500 employees to come out next week to. There's so many things that could come up, but do we feel like there's reasonable expectations that are there of each other? And then do we feel like there's an ability to share feedback openly and it's received from a place of where it's intended, which is an opportunity to do better together? Or is it like, no, we're not going to listen to what you have to say. We're just going to do what we want to do. And that could be problematic. So that's how some of those things seem to show up in my experience and what I've heard from others, as far as how you can identify that, maybe there's some power dynamic issues going here that we need to examine further.
Yeah, I love those. There's really, really strong things to be thinking about. And this reasonable one, I think, is one that I maybe see the most often go off the rails. And that's where, how do you say no in a way that feels comfortable in those situations? And one of the things I think can be really useful is putting less pressure only on the meeting. Like, sometimes
Mhm.
if everything has to happen in the meeting, but all of us don't process as quickly as others. So sometimes it's saying, you know like, before you go into the meeting, having a few like exit sentences where you basically are putting a pin in that topic because you don't feel ready, and then following up in writing or following up in another way, because I think sometimes in meetings everyone can get excited, and things start rolling, and maybe uh you know that can lead to saying yes to things you didn't intend to, or not fully thinking of the implications of saying yes because it's in the moment. And so I often think it's good to have a few of these, like, I'll need to get back to you on that, I have to check in with some other
Mhm.
people, like,
Mhm.
have those just like right ready for you, because you don't have to answer every question or decide everything in the one phone call. And I think sometimes with charities, we are so excited that we got the meeting, it's like, okay,
Mhm.
now I'm going to make sure every single thing is done in this meeting. And to me, that right away sets up a power
Mhm.
differential, because you're
Mhm.
feeling too much pressure on like 30 minutes or 60 minutes. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
I give everyone permission to like follow up, put a pin in things, say you need to check in with others, follow up in writing. All these things can give you like a bit of space to I think create some more balance if you need to
Mhm.
in those conversations.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we feel like we should just say yes to everything because our eyes are kind of like thinking about the partnership or the funding alone. And I understand the inclination towards that. I understand that we need funding to do the good work that we do, but you could actually potentially cause harm in the relationship too if you start of committing to things that you're not able to do and they're not
Right.
reasonable for your org, or they'll take too much energy and expense our budget away from other things that your organization is doing, because you're doing things outside of fundraising. You have programs and services to deliver. So if things are kind of now diverting away to a degree that's actually going to not work for your organization, or you're going to put too much work on certain folks in your team, like, you really do have to be thoughtful. And again, I do think that
Yeah.
doing that actually creates, again, mutual respect, because I think it feels like, oh, they're being thoughtful, they're being intentional, they have a process to go through. I don't think that's also a bad thing. So it's not no, right? I think, like you
No.
said, it's putting a pin in it. It's like, and some things might just be like right away. It's like, okay, we
No,
don't,
no, no.
that's not going to work. But it's like, let us review that, get back to you, and then you might be able to then explore that further and say, oh, here's what you're asking to do, but what were you actually hoping to accomplish with that? What were your goals? And then here's another way we can do that actually works better for all of us, and here's
Exactly.
why. And being open and honest about what's going on within our organization, I don't think is also a bad thing, because we have to remember that a lot of folks in the roles that they're in, in the companies may or may not have a direct experience working within community organizations. And so how are they going to learn? And the ones I've found are really curious, and they often ask a lot of questions and try to learn.
Yeah.
But we can share some of that with them and say, here's what goes on behind the scenes. And then I think they'll have a better appreciation for our work too.
Yeah, I love that. And I also love the fact that also can bring it back to the mission, right? Like it never hurts to say, we need to look at how much of an investment we need to make this happen. I know that you are committed to our mission, or, that kind of thing, so that it is, it is clear that there's costs associated with these relationships. And we need to make sure that we're still advancing the mission, which is why we're here, and why, if there's values alignment, they're on the conversation too, which is why it comes back to that. Okay. I wanted to also, okay, I'm going to shift gears here, and we are going to do a little bit of like scenario conversation. Okay. So we talked about a bunch of different examples, but I'm going to hone in on a couple so that we can share today. So the first one I have is this: that you're on social media and you see a post about your organization posted by the company. It talks about your partnership, and you are not happy about the representation of your organization in this post. You might feel it's harmful. How would you handle this? What would you do in this situation, Rickesh?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, there's like some proactive things you would do, but if you find that this already happened and you see, oh wow, that's not the way we want, our work represented, or the communities that we serve represented, you come in with something like, thank you so much for sharing the impact of our work together, and with your team and with the public. We also believe you want to ensure that you're not causing harm as we create that impact. So we just wanted to draw your attention to something that was shared about the communities that we serve. And we understand where that messaging may have come from, but that term or that representation can, for example, be harmful as it perpetuates negative stereotypes. We would love to work with you, to offer various other ways to sort of proudly share our work together and won't potentially cause that negative impact. And I think if someone's hearing that, it's like allowing for the fact that, we're not all perfect and we might make mistakes. And I think just also implanting in there that, please involve us in this, again, as a subject matter experts, that we're not saying don't promote. We're just saying, just run it by. Let's have a chat together so we can give you some guidelines so that we're aligned on the messaging.
Yeah. Really. You have to address it right away, for sure. I couldn't agree more. But also in the learning, where are the opportunities to provide guidelines and advice and tips on how that can show up earlier? Like I'm always like, if you have, those guidelines or words we use and don't use and that kind of thing, like the sooner you can make sure that the right people have those on their side, being proactive can be so handy. Okay. I mean, I'm conscious of time and we have so many things we wanted to share. I knew this was going to happen. This is such a big topic. We are like not even on the iceberg. We're at such the tip of the iceberg in addressing it, but we wanted to get started. If you do have questions, do feel free to put them in the chat. If we don't get to them today, we will follow up with them. Okay, next one. You found a company you think aligns. You go to their website and they have a portal application. Side note, everyone knows I can go on quite the rant about portals, but today we're going to have Rickesh talk about you go to the site, it has a portal, you have a ton of questions around how you're going to submit, you start reading the application, you reach out and don't hear back. Now what? What are we going to do with the portal application from your side of things?
Oh, don't worry, Heather. I know how you feel about portals. Like, yeah, if I wanted
Right?
to make your blood boil, I could start talking more about them. But I think, again, I know why organizations do it, especially big ones. They're getting so many applications. I remember hearing a stat once that one was getting like 10 applications a day or something like that. And it's a lot. So they have their processes, I understand. The challenge is that then a lot of organizations are going to be spending time and effort and energy applying for funding that may not even be a fit. And it's going to waste both the time of the charity and the person who's reviewing those. So I think to be able to put a message, especially if you're talking to somebody and they're like, oh yeah, we just go to our portal, or you just, that's the only information you find. I think sending a note to say something like, hey, we're really excited and appreciate the opportunity to be considered to sort of partner together and do some great work together. We really also want to ensure that we better understand how we could be a fit so that our time and yours is used more effectively. It's very difficult for us to outline a mutually beneficial partnership without some of that additional information from you. And so that's maybe one approach. What I think is important in that too is it's a kind of a bit of a test as well, because it'll see if you get a response, then you can kind of see who you're working with and if they're even open to those kinds of conversations, and that to help you. You might have that first conversation and it's very quick. I've had this before, and in a 5-minute conversation, you quickly recognize that it's not even worth it for you to submit an application. You've just saved everybody a whole bunch of time. And so I think understanding the needs a bit more, because they don't, on a portal, they're not like, here's all the things we're looking for, here's all of our decision-making criteria. They don't really share all that. Perhaps down the road there might be quote unquote portals that are set up in a way that they actually can serve more of that purpose down the road. But I really do think that the conversation will be good for everybody. So trying to push beyond that, so not just spending 3, 4, 5 hours saying, oh, they told me to go to the portal, I'll just do that, and you never hear back and you don't know even how it was. So I'd really encourage conversation as much as possible.
I do too. And I mean, I'll even settle for like, ask your questions as in concise way as possible in an email. Sometimes that will at least, elicit a bit of a back and forth, again, acknowledging that your time is valuable too. Like, I do understand both sides of the scenario. The big companies do need some mechanism to sort, to keep track, all of those things 100%. At the same time, the time the time spent on filling out applications where you have no chance is too high. So we need to, in my opinion, like, close that loop. And if it can be a quick email. I've seen now more organizations that are doing these webinars to give you some more insight and answer questions. I also think that that's a nice addition to the process, again, trying to be more transparent. So we are seeing adjustments in this, but honestly, if we're going to get to this place, which they do talk about in From the Mind to the Heart, of like more trust-based philanthropy, that has to happen by having a conversation. So if you're in the transaction place of filling out a portal and you're dreaming of the trust-based philanthropy, that is a very big chasm. You need to be at least at the conversation if you're going to get to trust. So I do think that we're going to see more shifts in that in the coming years. Like, how can this happen in a more complete way? These are 2 examples. We have many more examples. We don't have much time left. So Rickesh, I'm going to ask you to share maybe one more example and how you'd, deal with it, with the caveat that we are going to put together some summary notes from this conversation. And we will include a few more examples with some ideas for handling them in those summary notes, so that you can get a little bit more of insight into all the things that Rickesh and I have covered in our conversations and our scenario planning. But what's one more really good example that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I have a real example from my own experience, where we had a company that was asking us to, they said, okay, all of our employees are going to donate clothes. And then you're going to invite, I'm just using their words, less fortunate people to come, and we'll have them hang them on racks in our foyer. And they'll come and pick clothes out, and our employees will be there kind of like cheering them on. You have to picture this, there's like balconies and stuff looking down the foyer. And it was a very interesting request. This was a $75,000 partnership. And I could not, live with myself. I was like, I can't leave this as is. So not only can I say, this is not going to, that won't work that way. I also had to just share with the person as to why. So it was just, again, getting my composure, taking taking a breath and say, okay, what I really want this person to know is that, I appreciate where they're coming from, and that I had to explain how there's a dignity element component that will not work for folks that are in that situation where they're, perhaps needing clothing. It's like, that's not going to work with all their employees sort of watching. So what are your goals in this? What are you trying to accomplish? You're trying to get employees to do something together? Are you trying to have people understand the cause better? And then we can kind of go from there. So I really just told them why we couldn't do what they asked for, but tried to explore what they were hoping to get from it. And they actually I didn't want to embarrass them either. I wasn't trying to say like what you've asked for you should feel bad about asking for it. But they actually thanked me and they said, "Oh my gosh, like I can totally see what you're saying. We're not going to go down that road at all. I appreciate you telling me. How else can we do this?" And then we worked something out together that accomplished the same goal. Partnership went forward, no harm done. And in fact, I think that they appreciated that we shared something. So it was hard because I'm like $75,000, but I also knew that my my boss at the time, our organization, would support that conversation, and that was an
Yeah.
important part of it.
Such a good story, because that education piece, like you saying, is true to yourself. I think these are all really great takeaways for people who are listening, and I'm sure have experienced similar situations. I have one question in the chat. There may be others that I've missed, and we will go back to, but I have one in the chat I'd like to ask you, Rickesh, before we close up here. The question from Julia: as a fundraiser, if you aren't a member of the community you are serving, should you share or address that with the corporations you are having a meeting with, or is that a distraction? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really unique question. I mean, there has been lots of conversation happening recently about representation and fundraising, and I think that's an important consideration. Whether you bring it up front directly or not, I think is probably a matter of context. I don't know if it's like you come in the first thing and say, "Hey, guess what? I'm not a member of the communities that we're serving." But I think if it does come up and it feels okay to do so, especially if there's a bit of a question about like how can you fundraise, for this cause, how do you understand it? I think expressing what you've done as a fundraiser to immerse yourself in the cause, to gain understanding, to go on your own personal journey, to talk about, hey, I'm not of the community, but here's what I'm doing so that I can, as a fundraiser, represent this work properly and with dignity, and with representing folks, doing this work in a way that is respectful of the community served. So I don't know that I think in a corporate fundraising environment, I might see that coming up less sort of from their end. So I think I'm going to think a little bit more about that. But that's my initial thoughts. I don't know that you need to address it up front, but be prepared to have a conversation, and if it feels appropriate, about how you as a fundraiser can still do this work, even if you're not from the community that you specifically serve.
Yeah, thanks for that thoughtfulness. We will give that more thought. I'm inclined to agree that that might be a conversation for down, like along the journey, maybe when there is some trust and there's some sharing about, different people's stories too. So that might be a way to build over time. We have reached the end of our time together. And I do acknowledge that, as I said at the beginning and along the way, this is a complex topic, and we are just starting to share some of the things that we learned. So with that in mind, please do follow up with questions or thoughts on what we've shared today, and additional ideas. We welcome that. We are pulling together a summary of this conversation, some of the resources we looked at, some other scenarios, some other criteria, ideas that you can put in play. You can get that by signing up for my bridgeraise.com for my e-news. It will be out in a couple of weeks. I will also post on LinkedIn when it's available. And I just wanted to thank you again for being here. If you are just getting started at thinking in this space, or working through your specific perspective, we hope this conversation got you started with some new ideas or some thoughts. And if you're experienced in this area, we hope that this also gave you some ideas and some thoughts. And by all means, again, with all of you, we welcome your follow-up. I know that after this conversation, all of you are going to want to be in touch with Rickesh in the future. So before I close off, Rickesh, where can people connect with you?
Sure, thanks. Well, first of all, let me just say thanks for having me here and for opening up the conversation. You've been doing a lot of reflection, a lot of good work in this space, and we've worked together, and I really appreciate that. Even having this platform and this being a topic of discussion. So thank you for that. For connecting with me, you can go to radianceadvisory.com, which is the organization I mentioned before. You can connect with me on Twitter at Constant Changes, or if you, I'm kind of like shy to share this, but Charity Dad on TikTok. It's my experimental TikTok.
I love it. I'm glad you shared it. I think all of us, need to do some experimenting in our work and in our lives. It's fun. Sometimes we need to smile. So absolutely, you should follow all of those places. Again, thanks everybody who has joined live, everybody who's watching the replay. I look forward to being in touch in the future. Thank you so very much.